Ready? 3, 2, 1, action. I'm Michael Pessah ASC. I'm a cinematographer. My work ranges from feature films to commercials, television, and documentaries. My unscripted shows have been nominated for Emmys the past 4 years in a row. The idea behind this project was to film a test for Sony that was more interesting and maybe more illuminating than a typical camera test. In my mind, the superpower of the Burano is the versatility of the camera. And so I devised this shoot in a way that we could step the camera through all of its various builds, from the simplest, almost ENG style build of the camera to a build where it would have G master lenses with stabilization and autofocus. Then put the camera onto a Steadicam, full frame sphericals with remote focus and your kind of typical commercial type setup. And finally a build for a bigger feature or for a bigger commercial, fully built out Steadicam on an anamorphic lens. And it really shows off the versatility of the Burano. I didn't use any filtration when filming stopwatch. I wanted people to really look at the image and feel like it's a fair representation of what the camera could do. My first takeaway, and I'm probably sounding like a broken record when I say this, is how versatile the camera is. The Burano is what I'd call lens agnostic. You can put any lens you want on there. And I think for many of us cinematographers, the saying is the lens is sort of our film stock. And to have a camera that plays well with so many different types of glass is really, really helpful and important. Another takeaway, and I really think this is actually almost the most important thing, is how beautifully the Burano handled skin tone in a variety of circumstances. Was really wonderful to see. It had great verisimilitude. It rendered skin tone without artifacts or strange bumps in color. It held on to skin tone in low light levels and in backlight using a lot of smoke and atmosphere, which is a circumstance that I think some other cameras might block up or sort of struggle with. It handled that lighting scenario with a lot of grace. Another takeaway is the Burano cut together with the FX3 really easily. The FX3 is really handy to just get into small spaces quickly. Of course, the Burano has more range than the FX3, but it didn't take very much work in the color grade to get those cameras to play together. And in my mind, the ecosystem of the Sony cameras, from the FX3 to the FX9 to the Burano to the Venice and everything in between, is really Sony's sort of superpower. The Burano has an extraordinary dynamic range, particularly when you're filming at OCN LT. What I was really impressed with was how usable the dynamic range was. I intentionally tried to devise scenes like the opening scene, which is filmed in completely available light at high noon in Los Angeles in the summertime, and the ending scene, which is filmed at very, very low light levels and almost entirely in backlight with smoke. We had scenes where we brought the highlights way down and the colors didn't sort of squiggle around as you darkened a scene. All the colors stayed very true. So I tried to intentionally devise scenes where we'd be playing action either way up in the highlights or way down in the shadows, so we can see how well the Burano would handle story elements at the extremes of exposure. Both in the highlights and in the shadows, the colors tracked really, really well when I brought scenes down. The tonality of it stayed very, very natural throughout the dynamic range. I'd rather have stops that are really, really usable than someone telling me they have all these stops of latitude, but the stops in the top and the stops in the shadow side of the latitude aren't really that usable or are sort of noisy and messy. In my opinion, all the dynamic range that the Burano gives you, especially when you're shooting at LT, is all usable, and that's the most important thing. The 16-bit OCN is a really important feature of the Burano. If you're used to shooting at AVC or something that's more compressed or something in 10-bit, the ability to see a lot of tonalities in scenes that have a lot of haze or a lot of really subtle gradations, or scenes that are playing way down in the shadows, is something that you're really going to appreciate when you're filming in that format. It's just a very pleasing and sort of organic space to be working in. And the backlit scene with the sparks and the smoke really shows off what XOCN does. You have a lot of really subtle gradations, and on top of that you have some really bright highlights playing against them. And if you look at it, you don't see any banding or any artifacting. It just looks organic and natural, and there's lots of beautiful detail in the skin tones throughout. The opening scene's in broad daylight. It was an inferno out there. It was very, very bright. I'd recommend putting in a high quality IR ND filter in your matte box to start, and then you can use the internal ND for small moves after that. I found it really helpful when a little bit of a cloud came in to not have to pull a whole ND out of the matte box, and I have the internal where I can do small adjustments even during the shot because it's invisible as you adjust it. One thing I was very curious about was how well the camera would handle that color green. That's a very tricky color. It's a very, very deep shade of green with a lot of metallic highlights on it. I think some other cameras that would start blocking up or it'd really just go to black, or the color would shift over, and it handled that shade of green really, really well. Similarly, we had scenes where we were using mixed light, right? We're playing some cyan against warm, we're using some warm light against daylight, and the Burano handled mixed light really, really well. And I was very, very impressed. The quality of the image using the Fuji non-cabrios and Super 35 mode was excellent, and there was a lot of sharpness in there. There were just as many pixels to my eye as the camera was claiming to render, and that's really important. For example, we had images that we shot full frame with the Zeiss lenses, and the colorist was able to zoom in on the pupil of our actor's eyes and track the eyes really, really well. Not because we were going to zoom into it for creative reasons, but that helps your color correction program track things better if you've got more pixels to start with. For owner-operators, having a camera that you could take onto a documentary and shoot verite with, or shoot sit-down interviews with, and then you get the opportunity to shoot your next feature and you're able to bring that camera on board, is something really, really helpful. And I don't think you could say that about very many other cameras.